Hello, everyone, and welcome to the June Friends of the Egypt Centre lecture. It's my great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, John Johnston, who is a freelance Egyptologist, classicist, and cultural historian. He is an ambassador for the International Society of the Study of Egyptomania, the chair of the Theatre of the Gentle Furies, and a former vice chair of the Egypt Exploration Society. John has lectured extensively at institutions such as the British Museum, the British Film Institute, the National Museum of Scotland, the Petrie Museum, and the Glyptothek in Copenhagen. He's also somebody who you've probably recognized from various documentaries on ancient Egypt, particularly on the reception of Egypt. And one of his specialities is Egypt in the cinema. Tonight, he is going to be talking about one of the most famous Welsh actors, Richard Burton, from the Tiber to the Nile, a decade in the ancient world. So thank you, John, for coming to Swansea again and being a huge supporter of the Egypt Centre that you have been over the last few years.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, good evening. It's always a delight to be back in Swansea, and I'm particularly keen to speak to you about Richard Burton, one of Wales' greatest actors. And I suppose I should move forward and put up, oh, does it? Where am I moving forward with?
First, let's see. Yeah.
There we are. That's a bit more like it. I make no bones about the fact that as an Egyptologist, as a classicist, I'm also a film historian, and it's that aspect of my experience that we'll be drawing upon tonight. So although there will be a lot of Egypt in there, perhaps not as much as in other lectures, but we're here chiefly to talk about Richard Burton's career on film for three specific films. But before we reach the films, we want to look back at the fact that born in 1925, in 1950, he had a major role. That's not right at all, is it? There we are. He had a major role in 1950 when he played Hippolytus in a new translation by Rex Warner of Euripides' Hippolytus. And this was broadcast by the BBC Third programme, the 30th of April 1950, repeated another twice. And I'm not sure, given the state of the BBC archives, whether we still have that or not. I have a horrible feeling we probably don't. Certainly, I haven't been able to find a recording of it. Just after the first of the films that we're going to speak about, he appeared on stage in Coriolanus, and here he is at the Old Vic with Claire Bloom playing his wife. And again, we've moved from ancient Greece to ancient Rome, one of Shakespeare's least lovable heroes, I think, Coriolanus. He is just somewhat unknowable. But one sees elements of Coriolanus, both with the stills that we have and something else I'll talk about in a moment, in so many other of the characters that he plays based in the ancient world. We have something very strange that came out of my researches, and it's a 1962 audio recording of Coriolanus, nothing at all to do with the Old Vic production in 1953, 1954. This was released by Caedmon Records, and it's the full production of Shakespeare's Coriolanus. But if you look at that cast, we've got Richard Burton, we've got Kenneth Haig, we've got Michael Hordern, Robert Stevens, Michael Gwynne. All of these people are starring in Cleopatra with him. And Jessica Tandy is the wife of Hume Cronin, who was one of the major stars of the film. So it seems to be, and I need to try and find more about this, It seems to be that Richard Burton has gathered these other acting types together when they're filming in Cinecittà Studios in Rome, because of course, traditionally, notoriously, the filming of Cleopatra takes place over more than 2 years. This seems to have been something that they just did for the hell of it. So to gather these famed actors together and do this production, obviously they were paid for it, but it was as much, I think, something to do. We know for a fact that Martin Landau, famous American actor, learned Italian when he was out there. Other people did other things, but I like the idea of this British theatrical community coming together to create something. And this is available for free online, and it's a very, very interesting production. It's worth listening to if you have the opportunity. So we'll come to the first of our ancient world epics. It's The Robe. It's directed by Henry Koster, and it comes out of this strange period that Hollywood goes through of a fascination with not so much the ancient world as the biblical world, as the ancient world as seen through the eyes of the Bible. It comes from a 1942 bestseller, I say best-selling novel. It was for a whole year at the top of the New York Times bestsellers list. Written by Lloyd C. Douglas. It crops up even after that initial year, a few times afterwards, particularly around about the time of the film's release. It makes it back into the bestsellers list again. So Hollywood clearly knew what they were doing when they purchased this property, when they decided to make the film. But more than that, they decided to make the film with all the bells and whistles jangling and whistling. It is the first CinemaScope film. Up until this point, all Hollywood films are 4:3 ratio. They're not widescreen. This is widescreen. It goes out of its way to show you that it is widescreen because these curtains open and you're looking directly into the amphitheater of Rome with gladiatorial combat just about to take place. And the idea that you are opening these wider, that would be a normal sort of 4:3 ratio. The fact that you're opening it wider, cinemas had to be specially adjusted to accommodate this film. And of course, CinemaScope and the whole idea of widescreen would become de rigueur during the 1950s and onwards. There's a very, very brief Egyptological connection at the start of this film. There's an opening narration and there's talk of tribute coming from the various provinces. So we see these somewhat strange looking green stone sphinxes. I have no idea what sort of green stone that's supposed to be and no idea what those sphinxes are supposed to be either. But we also see, there we go. We also have a gilt sarcophagus. I can't imagine what sort of tribute the Egyptians thought they were sending to Rome. And if it was solid gold, but it doesn't look as if it's solid gold because we only got 2 people carrying it. But then even more bizarrely, we have these 2 sort of run-of-the-mill yellow late period coffins. What are the Egyptians doing? What do they think they are sending to Rome? It's no wonder Caligula's bonkers. So we see very early on the 3 main protagonists of our tale. Richard Burton there on the left-hand side as tribune, Marcellus Gallio. Gene Simmons playing a sort of ward, if you want. She's certainly connected to the imperial family in some way. And her name is very explicitly Diana, connecting her with pagan beliefs. And then we have J. Robinson as Caligula, all eyes and teeth. We'll come back to J. Robinson in some detail a little bit later. Many people say that he is the main reason for watching the film. I'm not sure that's entirely the case. We do have some extraordinary sets, very beautiful sets. This is Victor Mature as the slave Demetrius, and we'll come back to him a little later. But we do have very beautiful sets, and that's scarcely surprising because Lyle Whelan and his team win an Oscar for the set design. And here we have Tiberius at Capri, again, really making use of this widescreen aspect ratio. The only downside, I would say, at this point is that they're very keen to capture everything in a theatrical form. There are really no useful close-ups of anyone's face. Everything is sort of medium shot, which is a little frustrating, but it does show off the sets beautifully, and some wonderful matte paintings. The Tiber has never looked so clean in its life. And we have this incredible... Now, this is the question. We'll come back to it a little later. There is this, I suppose it's part of the imperial palace. Is it Caligula's own home? We'll discuss it a little later. It does look rather lovely, although all of the draperies over the stairs are, well, a health and safety hazard apart from anything else. I don't know why the draperies are there, but they always are. The one scene in the whole film, I think, that really lets it down is this scene at the docks with Richard Burton standing with his back to us on a ship. And that really doesn't seem to work terribly well. And I'm not sure whether they had to do some re-recording or... But it doesn't. Suffice to say, it really doesn't work. I think one of the main reasons for watching The Robe is Ernest Thesiger's Tiberius. So we get to see Tiberius, and we get to see Caligula. We have no scenes with them together, sadly. But Ernest Thesiger, who was probably most famous as Dr. Pretorius in The Bride of Frankenstein, and also Horace Femme in James Whale's The Old Dark House, really reins it in. It's probably the most quiet and understated performance of his entire career. And it works incredibly well. It also works somewhat against character, because we know from the ancient sources that Tiberius is a monster, that he is the worst sort of sexual pervert, that he is a bloodthirsty monster. But Ernest Thesiger plays him rather sweetly, rather intelligently. It's an unusual performance, but it's probably one of the best thought through performances of Tiberius that we ever see on screen. There are problems with the script. Given that this is based on a best-selling book, I haven't read the book. Apologies, I haven't read the book. I don't know how much of the dialogue from the film originates in the book. We have Michael Rennie, very tall, looking fabulous, and he is, and I quote, the big fisherman, Simon the Galilean, the one Jesus called Peter. And almost every time we encounter this character, we go through the same rigmarole, the same really convoluted description. And I'm not quite sure what the filmmaker... Maybe the filmmakers are attempting to create some sort of religious awe around the character by giving this convoluted description. I'm not sure that it really works. We again have problems with this is the closest we get to close up in the whole film. And it's when Richard Burton is really feeling at his most religious, calling upon God to assist. And again, the language sort of falls apart. When I was a very young student studying Egyptology at Liverpool University, I was told by my professor, Professor A.F. Shaw, never translate ancient Egyptian or any ancient language into something that isn't modern English. We don't want these or thous. Modern English is what's required. But when Richard Burton decides to speak to God, he says, I quote, "Father in heaven, he was the bravest and best of thy servants. Why hast thou abandoned him?" And it's really strange that he feels the necessity, not him, the script writer feels the necessity of going into this cod biblical voice. And it really doesn't help the script. And God help him, it doesn't help Burton either to be able to deliver the line convincingly, because suddenly he's quoting from it just doesn't work, I fear. We also have some strangeness going on with the big fisherman, Simon the Galilean, the one Jesus calls Peter. When he comes to heal someone, the Roman physician who's on site, who's unable to do anything, is horrified at the idea there might be any sort of magic involved in the healing process. That magic and medicine are two entirely different things. And we know in the ancient world that they were very, very closely connected. And the idea of a Roman physician taking umbrage at the idea that some sorcerers come into the room to heal just doesn't ring true at all. As we approach the finale, we come back to this. Recording stopped again? As we approach the finale, we come back to this wonderful reception room with J. Robinson up there in full Napoleonic mode. What he's wearing is very, very much like the robes that Napoleon wears during his own coronation, as painted by David. But we still don't know where this room is. There's a reference to senators and nobles of Rome all being there. So you wouldn't necessarily let all of the senators and nobles of Rome into your own home. So where is this? It's certainly not in the Senate. It's it's something that's just created specifically for cinema. And I suppose it works within context, but it certainly wouldn't work within ancient Rome. We'll have a look at J. Robinson's Caligula. His eyes and teeth and strangulated voice. He screams a lot, he shouts a lot. He is, God love him, only 23 when he makes this film. And then he gets the sequel. We'll come on to the sequel in a moment. Then he gets the sequel and he plays Caligula again at an even greater crescendo of thespian overexcitement. And apparently it made him a monster to work with. And he got almost no work afterwards. Part of it may also have been due to a little drug habit, but apparently he was extremely difficult to work with and just wanted to play variations of this screaming, misbehaving character. Years later, he gets to play Julius Caesar in an episode of Bewitched, by which time he's calmed it considerably, and he wears a lot of very bad makeup in an episode of Star Trek. He's an interesting character, but he's not the reason for watching The Robe. One of the definite reasons for not watching The Robe, forgive me if I've just said that aloud, is the ending. Gene Simmons and Richard Burton, because of their Christianity, are going to be sent to their deaths by Caligula. And Gene Simmons is horrified initially and says, once the Caesars of Rome were noble. We're on our third Caesar by this point. Augustus, yeah, pretty good. Tiberius, we've already said, a perverted monster. And Caligula, all sorts of terrifying things. So the Caesars of Rome weren't really noble. So again, this is a throwaway line that people in the audience in 1950s Middle America probably thought, yes, I understand what she's saying, but actually historically it doesn't work. So they're being sent to their deaths, horrifyingly to their deaths. Not just a quick execution, but they smile at one another and they walk out of the great room of appearances and reception. And then you can see all of that disappears and they are walking through the clouds with echoes of hallelujah in the background. And this is them going on to their life together in the next world. It doesn't work for me. It clearly did work for them because the film is a huge box office smash. So much so that they start work on a sequel immediately. Now, they've just killed off their stars. How do they do a sequel? Victor Mature's Demetrius the slave is still alive. So it's easy to do it, and it's not quite as religious in tone. It still does have, but it's not quite as religious in tone. We get J. Robinson's Caligula, but this time we also have Barry Jones, British actor, and he's playing Uncle Claudius. So we start to see the imperial. We've had Tiberius, we've got Caligula, we've got Claudius, and Claudius at this point is married to Susan Hayward, who is playing Messalina. So we see a sort of putative I, Claudius, beginning to develop. Remember, this is about 20 years after the failed attempt to film I, Claudius. So we see this starting to develop. We see a lot more action scenes. Demetrius the slave loses his religion for a period in the film. Instead wants to spend all his time with Susan Hayward's Messalina, who, being Messalina, doesn't object too much to that. And that allows for a lot of sex, and a lot of blood, and a lot of violence. But at the end of it all, Demetrius finds his religion again, and it all comes right. Apart from for Caligula, who is run through with a spear whilst watching gladiatorial games. And there is Uncle Claudius standing in the corner. And these Praetorian guards that we see on the right-hand side just run forward and say, oh my God, the emperor's dead. Here, you'd better have it, and take his laurel wreath off and put it straight onto Barry Jones' head. It's an approximation of what we know happened historically, but it's a strange one. It's a fast one. We're a long way away from, forgive me, we're a long way away from Richard Burton, but I did think the fact that it had a sequel. And Richard Burton does appear very briefly, just a little snippet at the beginning, intercut with new footage of Barry Jones and Susan Hayward. But let's move back on to the main. This is at the very beginning of Robert Rossen's Alexander the Great, we have this wonderful image, which is probably the most 1950s image of academia that I can think of. It is that pale blue, slightly faded color. It is everything that I remember as a child looking at books belonging to family members and in library. This was 1950s version of the ancient world. It's astonishing that it's captured so precisely. This is Robert Rossen. Robert Rossen spends 5 years preparing Alexander the Great. It is a labor of love. In much the same way as Alexander was a labor of love for Oliver Stone. And he encounters some of the same problems. He gets bogged down in his own love of the material, of his own approach to the story. The difference here is that it is perfectly linear. Oliver Stone's Alexander bounces about all over the place and has a belief that you already know the story and he can tell it in any way that he wants. Robert Rossen doesn't do this. Instead, with his substantial $5 million budget, he tries to show all of the exciting, thrilling events of Alexander's life, but still loses his way because there are no people to hang the story upon, I fear. The actual title card itself, Alexander the Great, 1955, is played with a wonderful piece of rousing martial music, ancient martial music, written and performed by Mario Nascimbene, and I'll come back to him shortly. When Robert Rossen, the producer, director, writer, is looking for his Alexander, his first thought, why does it keep doing that? His first thought is Peter Wyngarde, who we see second on the left. And Peter Wyngarde becomes very famous in the 1970s for playing Jason King in Department S and Jason King. He's also Clytus in the Flash Gordon film. He has a wonderful voice. He doesn't get to become Alexander the Great because he's playing the character of Dunois on stage with, of all people, Kenneth Williams and Siobhan McKenna in a production of George Bernard Shaw's St. Joan. And Siobhan McKenna writes to Peter Wyngarde and copies the director, Robert Rossen, into the letter and says, in St. Joan, he is all Dunois, but he would be seriously miscast as Alexander the Great. So with friends and colleagues like that, you really don't need enemies. So he doesn't get the gig. Instead, Richard Burton gets the gig. And Richard Burton has that right level, I think, more so than Wyngarde, that right level of slightly lunatic belief in himself, belief in the importance of his view of the world. He works incredibly well here. And if one listens to the recording of Coriolanus that I was talking about before, one can see elements of that Coriolanus character working their way through here. The unfortunate thing is that we have Burton from the age of about 15 until his death, 32. And he doesn't look any different during that period. We are stuck with Burton as Burton. whereas Oliver Stone does have younger actors playing a younger Alexander. Whether that works remains to be seen, but it's a difficult one. We have the wonderful American actor Frederick March as Philip II, who really is having fun with it. He is quite bellicose, he is quite aggressive, lusty. There's an incredible scene where after the Battle of Chaeronea, Philip II goes out drunkenly and starts shouting at all of the corpses and saying, if you were so brilliant, if all you Athenians were so brilliant, why are you lying dead? Why am I now the king of Greece? And it's a very strange, very unsettling scene, but it's beautifully nailed by Frederick March. And the pair of them work very well together. There is a distrust, but also a love, because they are father and son, although there are questions as to Philip's paternity. Certainly Philip questions it, and so does Alexander for reasons of his own. And I think for all of the spectacle, for all of the scenes of battle, and we do have scenes of battle at a time when such things were rarely shown on film, it might have worked better as a tighter family drama with some bells and whistles added. But Robert Rossen wanted to capture the drama of the piece. He takes his cast and crew from 28 different countries, and they go off to Spain. And that fact that they've moved out of Hollywood changes everything. It allows real landscapes to be portrayed. It means that they're not nearly as studio bound. It gives Alexander himself a much wider view of the world. The scenes that are set are beautifully costumed, beautifully decorated, but they're filled by people who don't really make an impact upon. There we have, standing next to Frederick March, we have the great Welsh actor Stanley Baker, and over there we have Niall McGuinness, both big names, big performers who just sort of get lost in the background, get lost in the story. And that's most unfortunate. We have, and it's very interesting, at the beginning of the film, as the credits are going up, it says, and the French star Danielle Darrieux. So they were clearly working the basis that the British and Americans wouldn't know who she was, despite the fact that she had an incredible career in French film going back to the 1930s. She plays Olympias, and she's very good as Olympias, but just isn't given enough to do, because all the time Robert Rossen wants to take us back to the excitement of the battlefield, to the next big epic thing that he can show in widescreen. And this is the Colossus of Motion Pictures, filmed in CinemaScope, color by. It's very much, it wants to be big. It wants to. There's another poster that I wanted to be able to show you, but I couldn't get in close enough to be able to see. That lists about 30 different earth-shattering events that take place during the course of the film. That Robert Rossen obviously wants to be able to say to the world, this is what I'm going to be showing you. And it's just a bit disappointing that he gets so bogged down in the epic qualities of the tale that he's telling. Again, we have Peter Wyngarde, an Olympias playing mind games with him, getting him drunk, encouraging him to murder her husband, Philip II. And there should have been more of that, that she should have been a putative Livia character. But the script just doesn't carry that off. And Richard Burton has a number of scenes where he says, you're always playing games with people, you're always trying to twist people, you're so manipulative. But apart from him saying it, the script doesn't really show us the level of manipulation that she undertakes. There are some lovely interior sets. Of course, all of the statuary is shining white. The idea of these things being polychrome doesn't come along until much, much later. But again, that fact that they're filming in Spain means that we get wonderful exterior sets as well. So we have the court of Darius, and we have Harry Andrews, who is probably best known for playing sergeant majors and spy masters. Is a very noble, very, very impressive Darius. And the sets help greatly. But again, the character is written in such a way that he's not really the main villain of the piece. The closest we can get to wonderful shots and Macedonian long spears, all of which must have made Robert Rossen's blood tremble. He must have been so excited to be filming these things. But really, Alexander doesn't have anyone that he can turn to, either as a friend or as a foe. The closest we get to foe is Peter Cushing, who at this point is a big television star. He hasn't done Hammer. He hasn't done any horror films by this point. He has just done 1984 on television. So he's a big, big name in the UK. And he plays the General Memnon. And Memnon becomes a turncoat, goes off to join the Persians. And he is the closest that we get to a real villain for Alexander. He takes Memnon's wife as his mistress, and that's Claire Bloom. Again, it's strange how often Claire Bloom crops up in Richard Burton's. And this, I couldn't resist. This is a typical Peter Cushing acting point. The Cushing finger crops up in almost every film that he ever does. And it works beautifully. You will notice it now that I've pointed it out to you, but if I hadn't pointed it out to you, you would not be aware that almost every feature film he ever appears in, the finger appears at least one point. We see a coterie of young men, and we see them lots of times. And standing behind him on his deathbed. And they are all supposed to be his companions, and there is Claire Bloom as Barsine, his mistress. But none of them are formed enough as characters. None of them really engage fully. One has to look at the end credits to work out which of these young men is supposed to be whom, and we'll come on to that in a moment. It does have moments of charm. We have Barry Jones, previously Uncle Claudius, now playing Aristotle. And there are some charming moments between Alexander and Aristotle, despite the fact that the way things turn out between the characters and reality. We have there, on the right, His Royal Highness Prince Peter of Greece, who decided, having studied anthropology at university, that he would be the technical advisor on the film. So it appears there, technical advice, HRH, Prince Peter of Greece. Prince Peter appears to have been an interesting character and went through sort of similar abdication things as the almost King of England. And largely stays out of Greece. So the fact that this is being filmed in Spain, you can see that he's on set there with the cinematographer. probably helped immensely. And Mario Nascimbeni at the top there, very, very frequently used, exceptional Milanese film composer. And this was the first time in his career that he had been asked to do anything relating to the ancient world. And as a direct result of scoring this film, he almost never gets a chance to leave the ancient world. And here you can see he's on set unusually, possibly because Raquel Welch is wearing deerskin. Composers are almost never on set. He spends the rest of his career writing scores for films set in the ancient world or films even set in the prehistoric world. And he writes the score for The Night of Counting the Years, Shadi Abdel Salam's wonderful Egyptian thriller, historical thriller, which I had the great pleasure of introducing here about 8 years ago, something like that. His scores are always very evocative. They work extraordinarily well. I have to say I cheated when I chose the image that I wanted to advertise, because this is Richard Burton wearing a makeup test for Alexander, because in the film his hair isn't curled like that at all. He's definitely got a false nose on there that he doesn't wear in the final film. And he's clearly standing there trying to show how much like Alexander he looks. And I'd assumed that this was just a makeup test in the studio. But whilst I was doing my research for it, there are a number of photographs which seem to indicate that it's actually a press conference at the Savoy Hotel that seems to have taken place on the 11th of January, 1955. Savoy Hotel was always holding press conferences for films in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And it's very odd. The idea they would have put him into this wig and nose for a press conference, but he's clearly just wearing a t-shirt and slacks, to use an old-fashioned word. So I don't know. There's more to be learned about what the setup of these is, but it's certainly not the makeup that he wears in the final film. One of the very disappointing things for me about this version of Alexander the Great is we never get to Egypt. We never get the founding of Alexandria. We never get to see Alexander kick the Persians out of Egypt. We never get to see him go to Siwa Oasis. But we do have an Egyptian character, Nectanebus, who is clearly based on Nectanebo II. It's a very, very bad Egyptian headcloth. He's there at the birth of Alexander. But it does tie in nicely with elements of the Alexander romance, as known from the Middle Ages. This is a piece from about 1475. It's from a beautifully crafted book called The Mirror of History. It's in the Getty Museum now, and it shows Nectanebo, the last king of Egypt, pretending to be the god Amun, coming to Olympias to impregnate her. This is because Alexander puts the story about that he was the son of Amun, that he was the son of the ancient Egyptian god Amun, and it gets absorbed into the romance. So I'm rather fond of the fact that this seems to get reabsorbed into this film, although there's no strong element of it there. The other thing that I'm rather pleased about is that Helmut Dantine playing Nectanebus is actually voiced by Christopher Lee, who spends a lot of time in ancient Egypt after this. This is a lot of years before he does any work for Hammer. But when one listens to the soundtrack, it is definitely Christopher Lee's voice that's being used. So back to the companions. We have all of these companions littering up the screen a lot of the time, most of whom are not named. And again, the companions moving in for the deathbed to the strongest comment. And there, one of those companions is supposed to be Hephaestion, never actually named on screen. Hephaestion being the lover, closest companion of Alexander the Great. But of course, in 1955, such things would not be discussed. But Richard Val was told, this is the character you're playing. And there he is in his costume, having a fag on set. You'll see when we get to Cleopatra, everyone's having a fag on set. It's very strange. And I think this comes out of the vast preparation that Robert Rossen does for the film and the problem with being writer, producer, director. He has it in his mind who all of these characters are, but never has the opportunity really to tell the audience. And the film comes in at about 2.5 hours. And really, it needs to be twice as long as that to cover what he wants to cover, but that was never likely to happen. It's an interesting failure, but certainly Richard Burton doesn't fail. He is certainly the best representation, maybe a little too old, but the best representation that we have cinematically of Alexander the Great. Sooner or later, we had to get here. Cleopatra, 1963. Producer Walter Wanger studied at Dartmouth University. And here he is, standing in front of John de Cure's set designs for Cleopatra, some of them. And he said that he was always fascinated by Cleopatra. He read everything that he could read about Cleopatra, and he reams off screeds and screeds of sort of modern pulpy romances. None of his reading is in relation to the classical world. None of the reading is in relation to the Egyptian world. It is all modern reiterations. And I think that shows with what we finally get. And here we are. I think this is a great still. There's Walter Wanger just standing there with the light jacket on in the middle of the Forum of Rome, Cinecittà Studios, with it all happening behind him. I think it's great that juxtaposition of reality versus cinematic reality. He has the idea of making a version of Cleopatra, and he speaks to the head of 20th Century Fox, Spiros Skouros, and Skouros says, yeah, that's great. That's back in 1917. We did a tremendous business with Cleopatra, Theodora. Dig out the script, dust it off, have a look at it. We can just do that in sound and in color, and it'll work beautifully. But of course, that isn't what Wanger wants at all. So he manages to wheedle and borrow and get money from a variety of sources at 20th Century Fox. And he begins to decide what his Cleopatra should be. He wants Elizabeth Taylor to star as Cleopatra, and she doesn't want to do it at all. She says she wants $1 million, knowing that that would be unacceptable. And she's told that would be fine. So she says, I want it all to be filmed in England, because of course she's got family and friends still in England that she doesn't get to see very often. We could do it at Pinewood Studios. Yeah, that would be fine. And the final one is she has recently lost her husband, Mike Todd, who was responsible for Todd AO, which was the widest widescreen it was possible to have. And cinemas had to be rebuilt to accommodate Todd AO. It's so wide. And she says, I want it to be filmed in Todd AO. And Walter Wanger says, I think we've got a deal. So she tries to finagle her way out of it. It's not going to happen. So she comes to England. She starts work at the Pinewood Studios. I'll put up this photograph because I just think it's a great photograph of Richard Burton, who, having heard the story I've just told you, must have pulled that sort of expression. Having filmed at Pinewood Studios a little bit, having caught a terrible chill that became complicated, she's like to die. And one can see that she's had an emergency tracheotomy in the final shot of Cleopatra. Joan Collins is told, we're going to need you to step into the breach. In the end, she doesn't die, but certain things change. So the original Marc Antony, and there are a few little shots, is Stephen Boyd, who had been well known as Messala in Ben-Hur, and would go on to appear in The Fall of the Roman Empire with Sophia Loren just a couple of years later. In fact, he's filming The Fall of the Roman Empire when Cleopatra is being filmed. So he begins the role, and then Elizabeth Taylor falls ill, and he says, I've got other things to go and do. So he walks away from the project. And Peter Finch is Julius Caesar. And exactly the same thing happens with him. He walks away from the project because too much time has already been wasted upon it. And there we have a wonderful costume shot of the new Marc Antony, Richard Burton, the 11th of January, 1962. The film isn't released until July 1963, and a lot happens in the meantime. There's a great story. Well, in addition to losing those two stars, the director, Ruben Mamoulian, decides to go off and do other work. So they bring in Joseph L. Mankiewicz, who's on the left of the screen there. And of course, Mankiewicz knows exactly what he's doing because he had filmed Julius Caesar, the Shakespeare play, with Louis Calhern as Julius Caesar and Marlon Brando as Marc Antony. So he knows how to deal with important Romans. And the idea of filming Cleopatra causes him no problems. We have another wonderful shot of him with Rex Harrison as Julius Caesar and, Richard Burton having another fag. I saw an interview from 1976. Rex Harrison was interviewed at the British Film Institute about his career. And he said in his whole career, the character, the role that was most important, most satisfying to him as an actor was Julius Caesar. And I think one of the reasons for that is because he was constantly, whilst everyone else was recording Coriolanus or learning Italian, he was constantly reworking the script, going away, doing research, doing as much serious research on Julius Caesar as he could, trying to bring more and more to it. But he also tells a wonderful story, and I think it's during this scene in the Roman Forum, where Richard Burton says, these books are terrible. I can't wear these books. Rex Harrison says, no, my books are fine. There's not a problem. He said, my books say Stephen Boyd on them. He said, they're not made for me. So I think Richard Burton throughout the film thought there was thought there was a problem. He was always playing second best. But of course, nothing could have been further from the truth. We get the incredible glamour, but this is John de Cure on set. And something I'm delighted to say that doesn't make it into the final film is this horrifying Sphinx. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. I don't recall seeing it on screen at all. When I came across this photograph, I almost fell off my seat. John de Cure was an incredible designer, was an incredible artist, and I think clearly there were problems about the manufacturing process. And we see something similar happening with this sort of Sphinx figure on the left-hand side that appears in lots and lots of scenes and just stands out like a sore thumb. It doesn't work at all. It's neither Egyptian nor Ptolemaic. It's just a messed up job. And the idea of the throne room looking like it's a little bit like J. Robinson's reception room in the Robe. It just doesn't sit right at all. We do get to see the tomb of Alexander the Great, which I've described previously as looking like a ready meal about to go into the microwave oven. It's clearly supposed to be alabaster, but alabaster never looked like that in its life. But where does it come from? In the background, one can see a representation of the Battle of Gaugamela featuring Alexander, and that comes from this mosaic from the House of the Faun in Pompeii. But one doesn't have to look terribly hard to find out where John de Cure gets his idea for Alexander's sarcophagus. And that is the sarcophagus of Napoleon in Les Invalides in Paris. And it's certainly the same object. And that's rather unfortunate. Because they could have had such fun in the creation of a real sarcophagus for Alexander the Great. But instead, it's just, despite all the money that's being spent, ridiculous money, the most expensive film ever made until Titanic. And yet it feels like they're cutting corners all the time. We talked about Jessica Tandy just before. This is her husband, Hume Cronin, who plays Sosigenes in Cleopatra. And he has made he doesn't ask for it to be made. He is told, we're going to make a little scepter for you to hold. And it's going to be made by Italian artisans just outside of Cinecittà Studios. And we're going to have it gilt, and we're talking real gilt, not magic gold leaf. And they arrive on set, and it takes weeks for it to be prepared. And he says, I don't think my character would use this at all. No. So it's never used. It never makes it into the film. Money is being wasted constantly in this way. And whilst a lot of it appears on screen, not as much of it appears on screen as it ought. This lady is Irene Sharaf. She won 5 Oscars in her life as costume designer for films such as The King and I and West Side Story. When she's approached to do Cleopatra, she says, I couldn't possibly do Cleopatra without it looking like a cheap version of Aida. I don't want to touch it. It's not going to work. And she is given free rein. And this is what we get. We get house coats and cocktail hats. This bottle of Diet Coke is more Ptolemaic than Elizabeth Taylor's. it's just, it couldn't be less Egyptian if it tried. And again, it's a huge amount of money being thrown at it, and it feels like a terrible waste. But what do I know? Irene Sharaf wins an Oscar for her work here. John DeCure wins an Oscar for his work. And that, for me, rings alarm bells, because it means, what do the public think that ancient Egypt was? What's the public conception of ancient? Is this? I mean, the very fact that her eye makeup influences women's eye makeup for about the next 10 years, up until about 1972, 1973. We see women wearing these Cleopatra eyes. There is, sadly, I don't have the image. There is a full-page advertisement with Audrey Hepburn, of all people, wearing Cleopatra eye makeup, saying, I use Cleopatra, and it's called Cleopatra Eyes, the makeup. And it looks just ridiculous. But again, people thought, how Egyptian, how exotic, I must look like that. It's all very unfortunate. The world premiere of Cleopatra takes place in New York on the 12th, in the New York Rivoli on the 12th of June, 1963. Elizabeth Taylor doesn't go to it. Elizabeth Taylor does go to the European premiere, which is in the Dominion Cinema, now the Dominion Theatre at the bottom of Tottenham Court Road. And when she comes out at the end, she said that she found it was a profoundly depressing experience. And the reality is that although they had filmed all of this material, they just needed to get out there as quickly as possible. Mankiewicz says, I can give you 2 films. I can give you Cleopatra and Caesar and Cleopatra and Antony. Both would be 2.5 hours long, and we could make buckets of money. But the horrible reality is that Fox Studios are so close to bankruptcy as a direct result of filming this. They just say, cut it and get it out there. So it goes out and it becomes a huge success. They always knew it was going to be a huge success. There's no question about that. But Fox are in very, very serious financial straits. And to give you an example of how close they are to bankruptcy, when Carry On Cleo is released, they do, because it's a spoof of Cleopatra. Carry On Cleo is released in December 1964. It's a tiny film. It doesn't sell outside of the UK. Nobody's interested in the Carry On films outside of the UK. But they're so horrified at the use of their poster that they sue. And they're in court for weeks, suing in the English courts. And I think in the end, they get £250,000 because they need that money. Fox is so badly battered because of the, and also, just to add insult to injury, the original poster had to be adjusted because Liz Taylor, Richard Burton, Rex Harrison all have equal billing. And Rex Harrison said, I'm not on the poster. If I'm not on the poster, I will sue you. So the artist comes back and creates a little Julius Caesar peering over Liz Taylor's. And at this point, Fox Studios were genuinely terrified about where they were going and where, basically where their next meal was coming from. It's all very sad. This, sadly, Tom Chantrell's lovely painting, which is in itself a parody of a parodic film, is replaced by this sort of cut and paste thing. And it's really pretty ugly, but people still went to see it, and it's still one of the classic Carry On films. Rex Harrison said in his 1976 interview that a lot of people had complained about Cleopatra when it was first released, but he believed that it would stand the test of time and that it would become one of the great epic films of cinema. And he knew what he was talking about. Because although its failings are evident, the publicity surrounding it allows it to feed upon itself. It has become the great epic. One looks at reviews of Gladiator 2. That's an entirely different topic. But people say, I wish we had the glory days of Cleopatra. So in the mind of the public who believed in the designs of John de Cure and the costume designs of Irene Sharaf, in the minds of the public, Cleopatra is the epitome of the ancient world. I don't think I've got anything else to say. But I will take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, John. Yeah, let me get the other mic and I'll turn that. You keep that one that you've got there. Hello, hopefully that mic is on now for our Zoom audience. So thank you very much, John, for that. That was fantastic. A real kind of whirlwind through all of those movies, and not just the three that you were initially planning, but you brought in a lot of other ones as well, which I'm sure some of the audience members here, both in person as well as on Zoom, have seen. And I'm sure if you have any questions in Zoom, do please post them into the chat, and Sam will be able to read those out when we come to them. I mean, I suppose you finished there. I'll start off here by kind of like saying that everybody looks back to the Cleopatra one as the best one. So in your view, not just the three films you looked at tonight, in your view, what is the best of the ancient world films?
I have a great deal of fondness for the 1945 Caesar and Cleopatra with Vivien Leigh and Claude Rains, which looks beautiful, which looks like Ptolemaic Egypt, with an astonishing central performance from Vivien Leigh, who plays it quite differently from Liz Taylor. We don't even need to get Marc Antony involved. It doesn't go that far up. It doesn't go as far up as Caesar's assassination. But it's George Bernard Shaw scripted. It's a clever, witty, intelligent script. And it looks sumptuous. Bizarrely, it's filmed just as the Second World War is coming to an end. Literally, the Nazis leave Egypt and the film crew arrive. And the film crew bring their own Sphinx with them. Because it's not supposed to be the Great Sphinx, it's just a Sphinx. And it's made from papier-mâché. And it just gets left there after the end of filming. So somewhere out there, the Caesar and Cleopatra Sphinx still sits. There's tremendous poverty because the Nazis have had everyone. So they have all of these papier-mâché made with fish paste, papier-mâché shields made for the extras. And the extras start eating the shields because they're ravenous and they know they're going to get paid at the end of it all, but they're working now and it's hot and so they start eating the papier-mâché shields. But none of that shows on screen. It looks it looks as if it cost as much as Cleopatra. Beautiful film.
And so, well, I suppose not Gladiator 2?
Certainly not Gladiator 2. Certainly not Gladiator 2.
I haven't seen it yet. Don't bother.
I wasn't a big fan of Gladiator 1. But this is even worse. But The Fall of the Roman Empire, which Gladiator is a remake of, is very good. Works really well.
Yeah. Any questions in our audience here in Swansea? Sam, let me grab this over.
Thank you, John. That was an amazing talk, as
Thank you very much.
expected. Kind of leading on, you've already partially answered it. Some of the shields got eaten. There's a paper mache sphinx somewhere. I've noticed in a lot of films from the last 20, 30 years, you see the same Egypt props
Oh, yes.
popping up. I noticed in the new indie film, I recognized the chair that was in one of the carriages.
Yes.
So what happened to all these amazing costumes, all these amazing props? Were they kept and reused in other productions? Were they given to museums? Were they sold at auction? Do we know if, for example, I wanted to go and see some of Liz's very beautifully accurate dresses, where would one go to find these things?
You can. Most of the costumes from Cleopatra ended up back at the theatrical costumiers, Berman and Nathan's. It's now called Angels in London. But of course, the reality is whatever Irene Sharaf is designing, she's not making it. So she sends off the designs to a company like Berman's and Nathan's who make it, and then they hang on to it. So we have a situation, I can't bear that poster. We have a situation that the costumes used in Carry On Cleo, and this was possibly another kick in the teeth for 20th Century Fox. The costumes used in Carry On Cleo are the same costumes as were used in Cleopatra, because they go back into the storehouse, and Berman's and Nathan's, or Angels, has a vast storehouse. So they go back in and they get reused and they get reworked. I was asked one Sunday morning by text from friends who will remain nameless, who were doing a commentary for a film. If we send you some screenshots, can you tell us what films these props were first used in? And they were all Egyptian props, and yes, I could tell them which. Ridiculously, sadly, I could tell them which, and could give them some of the other films that they appeared in and the ongoing history. Sometimes these films, these objects that were made for films in the 1950s still crop up in film and television productions today. So yeah, they just get put in storage and forgotten about until someone says, oh, I need an Egyptian chair, and then they get brought out again. Thank you.
You mentioned also about the sphinxes that was brought to Egypt and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But wasn't there also the sphinxes from the Ten Commandments that were recently
Well,
rediscovered?
yes. The original 1923 Ten Commandments, Cecil B. DeMille creates a whole Egyptian city in
Arizona? Is
the
it?
Mojave Desert. And they just walk away at the end. So archaeologists are excavating and coming up with some interesting stuff, because it's all just been covered by sand since, well, more than 100 years now. It's all just been sitting there waiting to be found, just like ancient Egypt.
It's bizarre, really, isn't it?
Yeah. It means that people will always want to excavate something.
That is true. Any other questions? Yep.
Oh, right. I just want to say thank you very much for your talk, and also for showing us some really amazing images of Richard Burton, the ones where you thought they were to do with the when he's wearing the wig.
Oh, yes, yes.
Stunning photographs.
Thank you.
Say thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
It's always nice to try and find unusual images that perhaps you wouldn't ordinarily come across. But I always, when I'm talking about films, deliberately don't show clips, deliberately don't say, oh, here's 5 minutes from the, because I want people to go away and rediscover the films in their own homes and see the films for themselves and say, no, I take issue with them about that, or he was absolutely on mark there. But it's not the same if I show a clip and then stand and dissect it. It's much better to encourage people to go and see those things.
Any other questions? Do you have anything online? No?
No.
Let me just scroll up in case anybody sent anything privately to me. Doesn't look like it. No, don't see anyone. So if there's no questions online, last chance, feel free to turn on your mics if you want. Otherwise, we will finish. No.
Thank you very much.
Questions. Well, thank you very much, John. Again, that was fantastic, and I'm sure we'll be having people who are now trying to watch those films, and perhaps not with the critical eye that you give them. But thank you again.
Everyone's a critic. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And thank you to everybody who attended in person as well as online. I hope you really enjoyed the talk. That is the last Friends of the Egypt Centre lecture for this this season, but we will be back soon. And if you're members of the Friends, Sam is no doubt sent the link into the chat as well. If you're not a member, that you can be. We will be working on the programme, and we'll be posting that to members as soon as possible. Thank you, everybody, and see you all soon.